This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silence them. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 126, Dawson McKinney. On May 11, 2020, a young mother ran to her neighbor's house with her 2-month-old son, saying the baby was vomiting and his breathing was labored. Dawson McKinney was taken to St. Luke's Hospital in Boise, Idaho, and placed on life support, suffering from severe brain injuries. Danielle Radue was taken into custody and charged first with her son's injury and later with his murder. On May 15th, Dawson died in his daddy's arms. This is the story of a perfect baby boy with the most incredible head of wild brown hair you've ever seen, who changed the lives of everyone who was blessed to know him during his 2 short months on Earth. It's also the story of a mother who to this day refuses to take responsibility for any of her own actions, including the death of her own son. For this episode, I had the honor of talking to Dawson's dad, Adam McKinney, who told me all about the special little boy who taught him countless important life lessons. This is the tragic story of Dawson McKinney. I'd like to take a moment to thank my newest patrons, Lauren K. from Nurjutpa, South Australia, and from Atlantis, thank you to Rhonda B., Karina S., and Helen. Thank you all so much for your pledges, which are helping me to be able to work from home, which is the only way I'm able to continue making the podcast. I truly appreciate your support. To make a pledge, you can visit patreon.com/stlcpod. I initially covered Dawson's story on Suffer the Little Children blog in May of 2020, and I've been following it closely ever since. Take one look at the Facebook photo album for this episode, and I guarantee you'll fall in love with this little man just as quickly as I did. Dawson deserves to have his story told and to be remembered, and it's my privilege to help his dad do both by telling his story. This story takes place in Meridian, Idaho, which is the same city where 9-year-old Emric Osuna spent the last months of his life. I told Emric's story a few weeks ago in episode 121. Today's episode is about a tiny, helpless infant who only lived for 2 months before tragically losing his life to the violent actions of his own mother. On Monday, May 11, 2020, EMS responded to a home in the 2000 block of North Swainson Avenue near 10 Mile Road and Cherry Lane in Meridian, Idaho on a Code Blue call, which is a respiratory or cardiac arrest incident. After attempting to resuscitate the victim, the EMTs made the decision to alert police about the situation. 2-month-old Dawson McKinney, who was gravely injured, was rushed to the hospital in Meridian before being transferred to St. Luke's Hospital in Boise. Dawson was found to be suffering from severe head injuries, including bleeding on the brain, retinal injuries, and a skull fracture, which medical staff deemed to be caused by non-accidental trauma. Dawson's mother, 26-year-old Danielle Marie Radue, had taken him to a neighbor's house to call 911, claiming Dawson had been vomiting and his breathing was labored. Danielle initially told police she found Dawson not acting quite right. In another version of events, she told her husband that their dog jumped onto the couch, causing Dawson to roll off. When police interviewed Danielle at both hospitals, she provided different information regarding what happened. Finally, she told investigators that she picked up her screaming infant from the changing table and placed him on the floor, much harder than she intended. Danielle was arrested that evening by Meridian police on 1 count of felony injury to a child. She made bond and was released, although a no-contact order prevented her from being near her son during his final days, which he spent connected to tubes and wires in the pediatric intensive care unit. Dawson's father and Danielle's husband, former U.S. Marine Adam McKinney, posted several consecutive Facebook updates on May 15th, and it was heartbreaking to watch Adam's hope give way to reluctant acceptance by the last post. The first one read, "My 2-month-old is such an amazing fighter. He is currently riding out this storm and doing such an amazing job. He has extensive damage to his brain from cardiac arrest, and they say altogether he went roughly 20 minutes without oxygen to his brain during the time of his 3 resuscitations. I beg for more prayers, and we can show these doctors a miracle. Dawson has already made it 19 hours past their expiration date for him, and we see no signs of him giving up. He is an incredible, loving boy, and anyone who meets him instantly falls in love. Right now I am so thankful for all the prayers and the amazing fight Dawson is putting up. Please continue to pray for him and a healing of his brain." The next post read, "The doctors came in the morning and said there has been no change since Monday. They are preparing to remove my baby boy from life support tonight. Please, please pray for this miracle to come full force today. Words cannot describe how much I love and need this boy in my life. Please pray, please pray." Adam's next message, posted at 3:09 p.m., read, "If you're a parent, please go hug your kids. Tell them you love them. Tell them you will always be there for them. Tell them how amazing and perfect they are. Tell them how much better your life is because you have them in it." Tragically, at 6:08 p.m. on Friday, May 15, 2020, Dawson Jace McKinney succumbed to his injuries. He spent his final moments with his heartbroken daddy. A couple of hours later, Adam posted, "This absolutely kills me. Thank you all so much for the love and support you showed my family and my beautiful son. He went to rejoin the angels in heaven. I am so grateful for everyone who prayed and prayed for us. All I can think is God must have missed my baby so much that he needed him back. Thank you for your support. You are truly loved by everyone, Dawson Jace McKinney. You are the absolute best boy in the world. Heaven must have needed a hero and another angel, and I can only imagine how bright heaven is now." Along with a photo of Dawson, Adam wrote, "My handsome little man, you were truly my drive for everything. You motivated me to be the best man I could be. I am so proud of you and how much you fought to make Daddy happy. I love you, little bear. I can't wait to see you again." According to a news release from the Meridian Police Department, the day Dawson passed away, his mother, Danielle, was rearrested on an additional charge of first-degree murder. The warrant specified a $1 million bond. Danielle was arraigned the Monday after her arrest, at which time her attorney requested her bond be reduced to $10,000. In his argument that Danielle's bond should remain at $1 million, prosecutor Kai Witwer told the court that the defendant's bond should not be lowered due to the inconsistent stories she told investigators, his concern for her psychological well-being, as well as the severity of Dawson's injuries. The prosecutor also went over the events leading up to Danielle's initial arrest, telling the court that after Dawson's breathing became labored, Danielle called 911, summoning EMS. She told police she couldn't find her phone, so she called from a neighbor's house. The prosecutor said, "The defendant initially reported to an officer her son had been sick and vomiting for several days, and that he had been to the pediatrician during the previous week." An emergency room doctor told investigators about the injuries Dawson sustained, Prosecutor Witwer said. "The baby had 2 areas of bleeding on the brain. He also had a skull fracture and reportedly had gone without breathing to cause brain injury. The baby had suffered severe injuries to his brain and hundreds of retinal hemorrhages in both eyes." He added that these injuries were consistent with a very traumatic event, but the defendant gave police multiple inconsistent accounts of how Dawson was injured. She has told police that what immediately preceded the 911 call was the baby screaming his head off, and she became frustrated and picked him up from the changing table and put him on the floor a lot harder than she meant to, and claimed it wasn't intentional. At different times, she's also claimed that this was an accidental falling off the couch due to the dog coming up onto the couch. Even that she tripped and fell, and the baby broke her fall. The defendant's statements about what happened, suggesting unintentional conduct, are not consistent with the severe and catastrophic injuries that the baby suffered. Defense attorney Edwina L. Cox argued for lower bond, saying, "The state is certainly entitled to amend the charge, but to obtain a warrant with the bond in the amount of $1 million when Danny was originally released on her own recognizance. The very nature of the original charging language contemplated death or great bodily harm. This is entirely outrageous." She added that Danielle caused no issues while out of jail and that she did not violate the conditions of her release. The state had even modified her no-contact order to allow her to visit Dawson in the hospital for an hour the day before his death, which Ms. Elcox argued they wouldn't have done if they thought she was dangerous. Prosecutor Whitwer acknowledged that the state did allow this, but a Boise police officer was standing by the entire time during that visitation. Ms. Elcox also mentioned Danielle's lack of criminal history and local ties due to spending most of her life in and around Meridian. She graduated from Timberline High School and later Boise State University. The attorney argued, Danny's criminal history is limited to a misdemeanor inattentive driving in 2015. She certainly has no crimes of violence. She has no history of failures to appear. Danny did not flee, so the prosecutor's assertion that she poses a flight risk is absolutely inaccurate. After hearing arguments from both sides, Ada County Magistrate Judge John Hawley maintained Danielle's bond at $1 million, remanding her back to the Ada County Jail after setting her next court date for 2 weeks later. A news release on May 18, 2020, by Ada County Coroner Dottie Owens stated that Dawson died due to traumatic closed head injuries. At the time, his manner of death was pending further study, agency reports, and investigation by police. It was ultimately ruled a homicide. A GoFundMe account was created by Adam's cousin to help pay for medical expenses for little Dawson and other unforeseen financial hardships his father would face as a result of Dawson's untimely death. The campaign read, Dawson was a sweet baby boy who was taken too soon due to unfortunate circumstances. His untimely death was a great tragedy to his family. He fought for his life in a week-long battle, surviving past the doctor's estimated time by 30 hours. Unfortunately, his battle came to an end. The campaign described Dawson, saying, He always had a smile on his face and stole the hearts of anyone who had met him, and even those who just saw pictures. Though taken too soon, he will never be forgotten and will live on in the hearts of family and through his dad. Adam McKinney was so excited to be a dad when he found out he and his wife were expecting. Dawson was his first child. He was a former Marine, and he was looking forward to teaching Dawson all the boy things in life, but sometimes life has other plans that we don't see coming. Ultimately, the campaign raised just shy of $10,000. After a few days, once Dawson's story had hit the news, Adam posted on Facebook again, writing, I am so grateful for so many people that reached out and continue showing support for my family. I am truly devastated and sick to my stomach, but I find comfort in finding how many people have showed support for us and made things to send us. I've had people bring my family dinner. I've had people cut my grass. I've had people pray for us. I've had people send me money on Facebook Messenger. I've had people donate to the GoFundMe page, and so many other amazing things. Please know we appreciate everything. We appreciate the support from people we have never met, but our story touched their heart. I want everyone to know that this family is heartbroken and left with so many questions and pain that may never heal. But Dawson was truly a gift. He showed me to never give up on humanity. He showed me how truly amazing people can be and are. Thank you everyone for your continued support and continued prayers for baby Dawson, my family, and our community that has been hit by this tragedy. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'll take a moment here for a word from my sponsors. In court on Friday, May 29, 2020, another Ada County magistrate, Judge Adam Kimball, also declined to lower Danielle's $1 million bail. Dawson's viewing and memorial service was held at Bella Vita Funeral Home on Tuesday, May 26, 2020. His obituary read, In Dawson's short life, he showed his family the meaning of love, compassion, kindness, and faithfulness. He loved to sleep, cuddle with his mom and dad, eat, and smile. Anyone who had the incredible opportunity to cuddle with Dawson became amazed at how much love they could feel for another human being. He taught his parents the value of love and strength. Dawson was just an infant, but taught so many people so many things. He continues to give his family strength and to bless us with the love and compassion of others. Dawson Jace McKinney's wings were ready, but our hearts were not. We love this precious little boy and will use his name to raise us up. We hope to always have a big smile like his and a heart as gold as his. If Danielle was convicted on the murder charge, she could face life in prison or the death penalty, although prosecutor Kai Whitwer did not announce early on if they would seek capital punishment. On Monday, August 3, 2020, Danielle Radue appeared in court via video from the Ada County Jail and entered a plea of not guilty to her charge of first-degree murder. At that time, her trial was scheduled to begin on January 5, 2021, and was anticipated to last approximately 10 days. At that hearing, Danielle's attorney, Edwina L. Cox, yet again petitioned 4th District Judge Patrick Miller to lower her client's bond from $1 million to $30,000. Saying Danielle had a spot reserved at a local hospital to receive inpatient treatment for mental health issues. Ms. Elcox said that Ada County Jail could not provide Danielle with the treatment she needed, but a lowered bond amount would allow her to seek appropriate treatment. Judge Miller was the third to rule that Danielle's bond would remain at $1 million, saying that although Danielle herself was a low flight risk, the murder charge was the overwhelming factor. 1 week later, on August 10, 2020, Danielle posted a $1 million surety bond and was released from the Ada County Jail. On September 14th, a motion was entered for a no-contact order against Danielle, presumably restricting her from contacting Adam. The order was granted a week later. Subsequently, Danielle was charged on October 11, 2020, with a violation of the no-contact order, to which she entered a not guilty plea. That case, which was assigned to Judge Michael Lojek, was separate from the murder case. It was ultimately dismissed in August of 2022. On October 12, 2020, Danielle's attorney, Ms. Elcox, filed a motion to disqualify Judge Patrick Miller, which was ultimately denied. A few days later, on October 16th, Adam McKinney filed pro se, which means without an attorney, for a divorce from Danielle. It's heart-wrenching that he had to file for a divorce without minor children, as Dawson was the couple's only child. On the same day, a joint restraining order regarding property was issued for both Danielle and Adam, but that is standard in Idaho and simply prevents either party in a divorce from selling, transferring, or concealing any joint property or funds during the divorce process. On November 13, 2020, a motion was entered to revoke and increase Danielle's bond, to which Danielle's attorney objected. 10 days later, the no-contact order was modified, although I didn't find any details about the cause. In December, Danielle's defense entered a motion to seal documents in the case, which was granted on December 18th. Danielle's trial, which had been scheduled to take place over 10 days and to begin on January 5, 2021, was vacated and rescheduled to begin in June, at which point it was once again pushed back. In April of 2022, Danielle, by this time 28 years old, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. Technically, she entered an Alford plea, which allows her to maintain her innocence while admitting the prosecution has enough evidence that a jury would likely find her guilty. The Alford plea is famous from at least 2 cases I can think of off the top of my head, that of the West Memphis 3 and the murder of Kathleen Peterson, as seen in the Staircase docuseries. Even though Danielle maintained her innocence, the Alford plea is still considered a conviction and is sentenced exactly the way a regular guilty plea would be. Danielle's 7.5-hour sentencing hearing took place on Friday, July 22, 2022. During the hearing, multiple witnesses testified, and both sides gave statements. Prosecutor Whitwer told the court that Adam McKinney left work and returned home mid-morning on May 11, 2020, to help Danielle with their son. Just before he left to return to work, he fed Dawson and put him into his infant swing. About 6 minutes after Adam left, a Google Nest camera recorded Danielle running out of the home carrying Dawson, who appeared limp and lifeless. Testimony from expert witness Matthew Cox, St. Luke's child abuse pediatric specialist, as well as medical documents, showed that a very violent force caused Dawson's death. A huge part of Danielle's defense was that she suffered from severe postpartum anxiety and insomnia, and that her mental status contributed to Dawson's death. This theory was backed up by another expert witness who testified via Zoom at the sentencing hearing on Danielle's behalf. Nicole Serino, the director of the Division of Women's Mental Health and Wellness at Oregon Health and Science University, told the court that she evaluated Danielle on 3 separate occasions and diagnosed her with postpartum depression. Danielle claimed her symptoms included high anxiety, hypervigilance with Dawson, and paranoia about dangers that likely didn't exist, which she said caused her insomnia. Dr. Serino said that Danielle's untreated psychiatric problems, the COVID-19 pandemic, and Danielle's naivety about mental illness caused a perfect storm of events. It is very, very rare for a woman with a prenatal psychiatric condition to harm her child. For her diagnosis, Dr. Serino relied heavily on a claim Danielle made that her husband, Adam, physically abused her, causing her to suffer trauma that made her mental illness worse and caused PTSD, which supposedly exacerbated her PPD. Adam refuted this claim in his victim impact statement, which he was kind enough to provide me before I recorded this episode. Here is Adam's statement in its entirety. At 11:28 on the evening of March 9, 2020, I was a man who was complete. I finally understood the meaning of love and the responsibility of fatherhood. I held my son for the first time just before midnight. To me, there was no greater moment in my life, and there will never be a moment that comes close to it again. I remember walking with Danny's mom to tell everyone we had a healthy, happy baby boy, and I started crying because I realized my life was complete. Dawson was perfect. Anyone who encountered Dawson or even saw him knew what absolute perfection and innocence looked like. Dawson was the best gift a parent, grandparent, aunt, or uncle could receive. He was the best gift this world could have received. Dawson's heart was made of gold. His smile would light up a room. His silly sounds would melt any hardened heart. I felt nothing but pure happiness whenever I got a second of Dawson's time. My favorite thing to do would be to place him on my chest and let him take a nap. I remember feeling a joy and an overwhelming sense of pride any time I thought about anything with him. I knew Dawson was going to change the world. I knew Dawson had already changed my life and the lives of so many others in just the first few minutes of his life. I knew that any darkness or any problem seemed so small compared to this beautiful life I had just seen come into this world and that I had helped create. This world was a much brighter place in the 2 short months of Dawson's life. Any parent will tell you there are good days and hard days of parenting. The reality is, I couldn't have asked for an easier baby to care for, and the only hard day of parenting to Dawson came on May 11th, 2020. On that day, my world came crashing down. My entire life had changed, and in no good way. I was standing in the ER at St. Luke's, waiting for the ambulance to show up with Dawson, and I was telling the doctors everything I knew at the time, hoping somebody could help my son. When Dawson arrived, the doctors were optimistic, which in turn made me optimistic. I thought my son was saved. I thought that after a little while I'd be holding my son again and letting him hold my hand or fall asleep on my chest. And all Danny could think about was how she could get away with her heinous, atrocious act. At the first opportunity for her to lie, she took it. When we left the Meridian St. Luke's and were headed to the one in Boise, Danny thought she had a great opportunity to lie to me. She told me, "I didn't tell you this, but last night June jumped on the couch and knocked Dawson off." To me, that was the moment I knew Danny was responsible for this. The reason I say this is because Danny has never accepted responsibility for any of her actions. She blamed our dog for a black eye that Dawson had. Dawson had a handprint on his arm and a big scratch on his leg, and both of those incidents Danny claimed she did not know how they got there. She blames everyone else for her actions. I stayed in the hospital with Dawson from Monday until Friday and spent time in the most insane headspace I've ever been in. I spent time staring at Dawson, begging for a miracle from God and offering any deal imaginable to spare my son's life. All the way to cussing Danny, cussing nurses and doctors. I spent time crying and smiling looking at him. I spent hours laying with Dawson, scrolling through every possible Google article talking about brain trauma and ways to help heal or fix that. I spent time on the phone with countless people talking about Dawson's condition and on the phone with Danny herself discussing every little thing the doctors had told me or mentioned. I talked to anybody and everybody that could help my son. I talked to caseworkers and victims advocates and police detectives, all during the worst 5 days of my life. My biggest fear for those 5 days was Dawson ever feeling alone. I was afraid that if I left his side, Dawson would feel that his daddy had abandoned him, and I would hate myself if he ever felt that way. I would struggle to forgive myself if that ever happened. During that time, Danny was released from jail, and she would call me and tell me how her life was ruined and that she was scared about what would happen to her. Meanwhile, I was absolutely terrified about what would happen to Dawson. On Friday, May 15, 2020, Dawson ultimately passed away while in my arms. In his daddy's arms, he took his last breath. In that moment, I took my last true breath, too. Dawson's death caused my death, emotionally and mentally. That was the worst moment of my life. Nothing can compare. During my time off work, I felt alone. I felt empty and isolated. I was constantly surrounded by people, but it did not make a difference to me. I had to plan a funeral for Dawson, and at every turn I was crushed more and more. And daily, or almost hourly, I was reminded of something so amazing about Dawson, but also something so terrible that it almost clouded the good memory. My plan was truly to finish setting up all the stuff for Dawson's funeral, and then after he was buried, I had planned to end my life. I hurt so bad. All I wanted was to be with Dawson again. The only thing that stopped me was I don't think my parents or family could have handled that pain added on, as well as I don't believe that's how Dawson wants to meet me again. I was left feeling like I was having severe mental problems and believing some people only wanted interactions with me so they could be a part of the most recent big news story. Some people wanted nothing to do with me or Dawson, but they wanted to be able to tell someone else they knew that they were involved. I questioned so many people and their intentions. I found myself feeling even more isolated and alone, even more afraid and on edge. I felt nervous and anxious at every waking minute. I couldn't go to the grocery store because I had such bad anxiety. I feel such a severe depression because all I want to do is kiss Dawson's forehead again and hold his tiny hand in mine. I feel like every day when I wake up, I'm being punished again for failing to protect my baby boy. I feel like as a father, I have failed in every way possible. I feel like if I had stayed home from work for a little longer, I would still be holding Dawson, instead of looking for opportunities and times to go to a cemetery and visit him. I feel like I let down so many people and destroyed so many lives just by not staying home longer. I feel like if I would have stayed home and not gone back to work, so many people would have happiness and bright lights in their lives. Instead, I'm left with an empty void that can't be filled again until I am gone. I envy the people who are dying because they get to see Dawson. I'm jealous of the people whose lives are ending. Sometimes I pray to be next, or I cross a railroad without even looking, hoping that it's my chance to be with my son again. I had to quit my job, because my job at the time I could not handle anymore. I was working in hospitals, and I had a really good job. One day I was working in a hospital and saw a newborn baby boy with a head of hair, and it destroyed me. I started having a panic attack, and when I returned to my job site, I put in my 2-week notice. I had to be done. I put myself in counseling at the VA. I attend those counseling appointments and am prescribed 2 different anxiety medications and 3 different depression meds and a mood stabilizer. Those are all medications I have started taking because of what has happened with Dawson. Some days those medications are so important to me because without them, I wouldn't be able to function. Some days I feel like I could do it on my own, but then a memory comes up and I realize I can't do it and I need severe help. Most of my hobbies are not fun or interesting to me anymore. Most of the people I was friends with, I don't have the same relationship with them anymore. Most people don't know what to say to me and I don't know what to say to them. People I talked to every day have become distant because they see me as a reminder of how terrible life can get sometimes. When they see me, they see the unthinkable and the unimaginable pain that comes as a result of Danny's actions. I will never see Dawson's first steps. I will never hear Dawson's first words. I will never know the sound of Dawson's laugh or the way he'll call me Dad. I'll never hear the words, "I love you" from him, and I'll never know his ambitions or goals in life. I'll never see Dawson graduate high school or start a family of his own. I'll never know his favorite sport or his favorite car. I'll never know what it's like to teach Dawson how to fish or ride a bike or drive a car. I'll never get the opportunity to be patient with him and teach him everything I've learned in life. A billion firsts with Dawson and I are gone because of Danny's actions. Danny has never felt the need to claim responsibility for her actions. Danny had an affair with her coworker, and that was her medication at the time's fault. Danny blamed June, our dog, for what had happened with Dawson, but then, when she admitted what had happened, she changed her story so many times that I don't know what is true and what is not. When she was trying to build her defense, she claimed that I was an abusive husband because she cannot accept responsibility for her actions. Danny is spoiled. She always has been. She has been bailed out of her problems time and time again. When I filed for divorce, Danny and her parents stopped talking to me almost altogether. Danny told me that it was because I made a vow that it was for better or for worse when we got married. But my question to her and her family is, how much worse do I need to go through before it's okay to leave? I went to Danny's defense on multiple occasions throughout this whole process based on what I thought was right and not what, in my opinion, was wanted. I asked so many people to help give Danny the opportunity to say goodbye to Dawson in the hospital. Her no-contact order was lifted because I fought for her. Nobody else tried to do that for her, but she can say I abuse her. Because Danny will always choose herself over others. She will always have a ready answer for why she has done anything, and it will never have anything to do with her. It's always going to be someone else's fault. I know that Dawson has already changed the world. Just in a short amount of time, he made a huge impact on people all over the world. Danny would tell me very frequently and very often that the truth of her crime and her actions would come out during the trial, and it wouldn't be until then that I would know the truth of what happened. She also told me that her new significant other has accepted her story and welcomes it. I do not believe that Danny is sorry for her actions. She has told me about vacations and trips that she has gone on and she has gone to do, and it destroys me inside because I think of how destroyed I am and how she seems to be so happy and carefree. I struggle daily and she doesn't seem to mind. I beg of this court to never let Danny have the opportunity to hurt another child or person in her life. Danny murdered Dawson, the easiest baby to care for and the most perfect baby in the world. I would like to see justice for Dawson Jace McKinney. Prior to receiving her sentence, Danielle was permitted to read a prepared statement in which she said she got the greatest gift the day before Dawson was injured, which was Mother's Day. She had just finished changing Dawson when he looked up at her and, for the first time, gave her the biggest, gummiest smile. I'm lucky to have that personal memory to hold on to. He was so loved by everyone, and I can't put into words how hurt I am that his days were so short on this earth. Danielle claimed that due to her mental state at the time, she still had trouble piecing together the day Dawson was injured. I do hope that I can be given the earliest chance to re-enter society, which is still no guarantee with a life sentence, but no life sentence will hurt as much as the life sentence I'm living without my son. As Judge Patrick Miller prepared to hand down Danielle's sentence, some of her family members in the gallery huddled together, struggling to suppress tears. Judge Miller spoke to the court, saying he reviewed a large number of text messages between Adam and Danielle, dating as far back as prior to Danielle's pregnancy, and found no evidence that Adam was abusive, as she claimed. When we think about the goals of sentencing and the impact of victims, certainly Adam, I can't imagine. I'm a father. I remember when my first child was born. He was in ICU for 10 days, and I remember the fear of not having my child live. The judge commented on the fact that in under 10 minutes on that fateful morning, Danielle took Dawson out of his swing, put him on the changing table, couldn't calm him, somehow inflicted his grievous head trauma, and ran out of the house with the baby to call 911 from a neighbor's house, which the judge called an awfully fast reaction. Danielle's changing stories and the legal strategies she and her attorney used in her defense ensured investigators never got the whole story. Frankly, today, I still don't know what happened that day. Judge Miller then delivered Danielle's sentence, up to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 18 years. Danielle cried out, tears rolling down her face, and she looked back at her new husband, Trevor Farmer, as she was taken back into custody. Danielle, Idaho Department of Corrections inmate 143939, is still being held in the Ada County Jail, presumably pending transfer to prison. Her parole eligibility date is April 26, 2040. After this quick sponsor break, you'll hear my conversation with Dawson's dad, Adam McKinney. My guest today is Dawson's dad, Adam McKinney. Thank you so much for joining me, Adam.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So I've been following Dawson's story since 2020, and when it came to an end finally as far as the legal portion, I was just relieved for you, but I can imagine there's no actual moving on.
Oh, yeah. Kind of one of the things that I've come to terms with is that it's something I'll never fully heal from. It's something that will always be in my mind and always kind of stay with me no matter what. But as far as the legal side of things, yeah, I would say it seemed like it was always getting pushed back and pushed back. So now I definitely have the closure now that the trial and sentencing has all ended.
That's good. Yeah, that's a lot of pressure, I'm sure, and having to show up for all these hearings and the details you heard, I imagine, are probably not necessarily something you wanted to know.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, that's probably one of the hardest parts is it's like a scab, and every time something new would come up, it's like ripping that scab off all over again, and now it's a fresh wound. So it never has the opportunity to heal. It's just always going to be there and always ripped off whenever a new hearing happens or whatever.
Sure. And it probably doesn't help that your ex-wife had no intention of telling anyone what actually happened that day.
Oh, no, that was definitely something for me that was very hard. And I know the judge that oversaw the whole case, that was something that he had brought up during the sentencing hearing and had said that bothered him as well. So I know there was a lot of people, and that's one of the things I still am looking for closure on is, what actually happened with my son? What was the events that occurred that led us to this situation?
Right. And you had left the house only 6 minutes before?
Yeah, that was kind of a bombshell during the sentencing hearing was I had no idea the timeline. Like, I had left to go back to work. So during the sentencing hearing, it had came out that it had only been 6 minutes after I backed out of the driveway when she ran out the front door with Dawson in her arms to my next door neighbor's house. So that was something that I had no idea about prior to. So that 6 minutes is kind of, a lot of what ifs and everything in my mind. Like, what if I had run back inside and whatever? I mean, there's so many questions and things that run through my mind knowing that it was only 6 minutes that changed my entire life.
That's got to be hard, but I hope you are able to relieve yourself of some of that guilt, because you couldn't have anticipated that something like that would have happened.
Yeah, and, I think a big part of it for me is that the guilt is always kind of there. I find myself regularly asking that, but kind of one of the things I came to an understanding of in the very beginning was like, it's kind of changed my whole outlook on life, where before it was like, oh, I'm running late to work. Like, oh no, what am I going to do? How am I going to explain this? Little things, they seem to be so big to most people. And now after the loss of Dawson and everything, I realized I've had the worst day of my life already, and that's something that I had to come to the realization of, is that there's nothing in my life that's ever going to happen again that can top losing Dawson. And so for me, like, I kind of find that feeling inside of, even though I feel guilt and everything for Dawson, and I had to ask a million times, what did I ever do to deserve this? Then I had to also ask myself, what did I ever do to deserve Dawson? What did I ever do to deserve such a perfect and innocent and absolutely beautiful baby boy, and so that was kind of one of the big things, is that as much as I feel guilt and all these emotions that overwhelm me based on everything that happened, I mean, from the initial incident all the way up to, us being in the hospital and ultimately him passing away, I feel like all of those things, I feel so many strong emotions for that. But I also have to try to look at a positive side of it, to where I know that I was still blessed with him, even for a short amount of time. I think a lot of parents kind of fear, what am I going to see my child accomplish in life? Will I see them, where are they going to graduate college and get a good job? Are they going to be better at things than I was? And for me, like, I've had all of those questions answered. I know that now, no matter what, Dawson's always going to be perfect in every way, shape, and form in my eyes. There's a lot of things that I missed out on with him, and that's kind of what kills me. But at the same time, there's so many things that in his short 2 months, like, he changed the world. I had a gentleman from Ireland that had reached out to me. I had a lady from, I think, Florida. She had made a bunch of stickers for my family to put on our vehicles. These are people I've never met, never talked to, never heard from, didn't know they existed. But because of the story, they were able to see my pain, and it kind of restored my faith in humanity, And so to me, that's something that, it wasn't me that made that change. It was Dawson. So to me, like, Dawson changed the world, And so as much as there's these harsh realities and emotions that overcome me when I think about him, I also have to think about all the great things that came out of his life.
Yeah, absolutely. I know he touched a lot of people. I mean, I'm up here in New Jersey telling his story with you, so it did have a far-reaching effect. And he's such an adorable, beautiful little boy that just even his picture, just glancing at him, everyone fell in love with him, I think.
Oh, very much so. I mean, I think about, like, traveling with a puppy, and everybody says, oh my gosh, that puppy is so cute, and they want to play with it, and pet it. And it was the same thing with Dawson, his hair. I mean, just being in the hospital, I have 3 pictures that are all back to back within the same minute that he was born. And I mean, when he was born, his hair was so long. And so I have these 3 pictures. In the first picture, he's crying. He'd just come out. I mean, he hadn't been here for more than, a minute, and he's crying, which is natural. And right after that, the next picture, and I mean, they're all timestamped within a minute. And the next picture, then he's just laying there and he's looking at the camera like, what just happened? Where am I? This isn't what I'm used to. And then the next picture, he's sleeping. And that was a big thing for him, was he was always just sleeping and kind of laying there. And I mean, he wasn't even 24 hours old yet. And he smiled for the first time. And I remember telling one of the nurses, he has dimples when he smiles, and she said, well, he's not even 24 hours old yet. There's no way you would know that. And I thought to myself, well, okay, whatever, nurse Ratchet, go be angry somewhere else, But now to me, I'm like, I have picture proof that he had dimples when he smiled. And so between his dimples and his hair and everything, it's like anybody we came into contact with or saw him, like, instantly fell in love, and they wanted to rub his head because his hair was so soft. So that was one of the things, even when he was in the hospital, like, all the nurses came in and they would say, oh my gosh, look at his hair. Because it kind of had like a little natural mohawk.
Yeah.
And so every single one of them would rub his hair, like, and, pull up on the mohawk kind of, just because they were all in shock that it's a 2-month-old baby that, has longer hair than his dad,
He sure did have great hair.
Oh yeah, he put me to shame, I've always kind of kept my hair short, and so when he was born, I was like, okay, I guess, he could pull it off. I can't.
Here comes a little rock star.
Yeah, exactly. That was his thing, was the hair, and everybody loved it,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he was beautiful, and he sure did look perfect. He didn't have any health issues or anything, right? He was just...
Oh, yeah, he was perfect in every way. I mean, the only thing, right after he was born, he had jaundice, but that cleared up after, a week. I mean, he was perfect. He loved to sleep. That was his thing. Like, he just was like, pick me up, hold me, I'll fall asleep. Like, to me, it made me kind of think of, again, like a puppy, it's like once they get tired, they just sleep. And that was him. Like, if, I would put him on my chest all the time, because as soon as I set him there, he would just fall asleep and then just lay still. So I'd sit there with him and, do whatever I was doing, watching a movie or whatever, playing, talking with somebody, and he's just sleeping on my chest. And that to me was just an incredible moment, because that's something that, like, for me, being a dad was always, right at the top of my list. I had, these are the careers in life I want, but ultimately, like, being a dad was the important thing to me. So any moment that I got with him was just absolutely incredible.
Well, I'm glad you got to have so many of those moments. Those are really special.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very much so.
How do you feel talking about Danielle or Danny, whichever you'd rather, or any of the possibility of postpartum depression and all that?
I think for the most part, I'm okay with talking about it. I don't completely understand in her mind what was going on. I think there was a lot of things that were said, whether it was in trial or at a hearing that she had said to psychiatrists or whatever, that I think a lot of it was spun up to kind of fit a narrative for her that showed that she was worse than she actually was. I do believe that there was some postpartum, and that was something that was kind of taken into account during her sentencing. But I know that there was a lot of things. I mean, almost a year after Dawson had passed away, she was Googling different things to try to figure out, oh, if I say this, what could the outcome be? If I say this to a psychiatrist. And most of these psychiatrists that she had seen, I mean, she had appointments scheduled with them. And I know, they had upped her dosage on a depression medication, but she didn't talk with anybody really about it. I knew that they had raised her medication, but she was very good about hiding it. And so I felt very in the dark about it, because I knew that she struggled. But for her, I would say, well, what do we need to do? What should we do to try to fight this and make it better? And one of the things that she had said was, well, I just need help. And she had an incredible support system. And that was one of the things that I think for me reflected poorly on her, because it wasn't unknown to the prosecution, for the state, even herself and her defense attorney. Like, I think for them, there was a lot of things they said to try to fit that narrative. However, like, she would ask my dad if on Mondays if he could take Dawson. And so my dad would take Dawson on Mondays. And then she had it set up with her aunt to watch him on Wednesdays and Thursdays, or Tuesdays, and I can't remember the exact dates, but her aunt would watch him 2 days out of the week. And I was home on Saturdays and Sundays, and my mom would come over on Friday nights to spend time with him and watch and kind of help Danny out. So she had this incredible support system. So there was definitely a narrative that was kind of pushed that she was by herself in all of this. And that's in no way, shape, or form true. Anybody that looked at Dawson just immediately fell in love with him. So anybody and everybody would take as much time as they could with him. They, wanted nothing more than to be with him, especially since he was such an easy baby. I mean, he was so young. And so that was kind of one of the issues between Danny and I, was that, I was like, well, when I get home from work, I want to see my son. I want to spend time with him. But she had, oh, well, he's here, and it was constantly he was somewhere else. So that was one of the things that during the sentencing hearing had gotten brought up, was that she was hypersensitive and so focused on protecting her baby. And I have a hard time accepting that as a reality, because I think that if that was the case, then you wouldn't want anybody alone with your baby.
Right. If you're hypervigilant, you're right. You don't want them out of your sight.
Exactly. And so I think, that came a lot from the things that she would Google, and one of her favorite things to do or watch or whatever was, those crime shows on TV, like the investigative things where watching people that are sociopaths or narcissists or whatever be interviewed by police detectives. And that was something she had watched prior to even knowing that she was pregnant with Dawson. So I think that she was kind of able to determine, what the right things to say were and how to handle certain questions and things. There was stuff that came out in the sentencing hearing, and I will say I have to give credit where credit is due. One of the things that I had no idea about until the sentencing hearing was that she was on all these chat groups with other mothers that, it could have been their first, second, third, fourth, however many number of children that they have. But all these women, they all had children right around the same time that Dawson was born. So these were all women that, found out they're pregnant. They joined these groups. And then over time, they say, well, I'm a month pregnant. This is what I'm experiencing. And they all kind of talk. And, prior to Dawson's birth and then after Dawson's birth, these were all things that she was posting questions about. My son is doing this. How should I handle this? This is my first child. I've never dealt with this before. And things that made it sound like there were days where she was so excited to be a mother and other days where she was worried or concerned. So I think hearing that, it brought up a lot of, questions in my mind where I was very confused. How can you have all these questions and concerns and, share these experiences with these other women and then have the outcome that eventually happened? But I think, there was definitely some postpartum there that was obvious, but I think a lot of people wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt as opposed to just make accusations.
Right. I mean, I agree. I think I did the same thing when I wrote the initial article about what happened with Dawson. I even, said to my readers, because I was just doing the blog at the time, let's not cast judgment yet. Let's see what happens. At the same time, you've got to know when you need help. And for her just to say, well, I need help, but all these other people were there and they were helping and it wasn't obviously enough. She wasn't really expressing what she really needed.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. And I think that's a big problem maybe within society, is that one of the things I think about is that, I look at somebody like my mom, who was so excited to be a mother that I think for her, like, she never had the postpartum, and I think it's possible to be very excited to be a mother and have the postpartum, but I think there's some women that don't experience postpartum at all. Anyone who does, I think that they struggle because there's a fear of being judged. If I suffer from postpartum and I say something out loud about it, people are going to think I'm a bad mom or a bad parent because I should be overly ecstatic about this. And so I think that it's almost like a taboo thing to speak about and talk about and ask for help. And to me, that's kind of where I see an issue, is that it makes it hard for people to kind of come forward and say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing and this is how I'm feeling. and I need help with that. And I think just in general, people struggle to ask for help. But I think it's even harder when everybody in your family, they have children, and, you're afraid that the people that care about you are going to judge you.
Sure. And there's a lot of mommy shaming out there. Even on the groups that she was probably in, you would see some of that, I'm sure. Because, if you're not the perfect mother and you haven't bonded perfectly immediately with your child, then it's, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? So it's got to be something that's very difficult to deal with, sure. Yeah, it must put up a lot of conflicting feelings for you, though, wanting to lay the blame all on her and then knowing that maybe there was some other thing at play.
Very much so. And I think a lot of where I want to lay the blame on her is that I know who she was. And again, to give, some credit, I think she was somebody who was very focused on herself and what she could receive. It was very much so about her. And I think that she was very spoiled in life and never really had to want or ask for anything. It was just given to her. After we got married, it was almost like this switch flipped for her where it became that way. And so to me, I kind of look at, who I married and who I proposed to were two different people. And so I try to look at who she was before and who she became after we got married and try to figure out, okay, well, why did she do this? And I think that the events of May 11th, I think that did change her down the road when she kind of realized, like, it wasn't just Dawson's life that she destroyed, my family, her, and all these people that loved and cared about Dawson, and all these people that loved and cared about her, they all have to see what she's done and how it's affecting her and how it's affecting me and my parent. There's so many victims to this story where Dawson is ultimately the main victim, but there's so many people that are affected by this and are victims of this. People that nobody even thinks about. I think about when Danny first got bailed out of jail, she had come over to the house. She was staying with her parents, and, her dad dropped her off, and I got home and I was like, oh, you're here. That's different. Not what I was expecting, kind of thing. And then he came by later to pick her up, and it was very weird because he was trying to leave and she started freaking out and yelling at him and telling her dad, this is my house and I can do what I want here. And so after that, I kind of said, I need to do a no contact order and give myself the space that I need. So when she had broke it, she got arrested for breaking the no contact order. The same officer that had showed up at the house to speak with me about that, because it took them, I think, over a month to actually end up arresting her for the no contact order violation, but it was a mess. But the same officer that had showed up to my house to take that statement, he was the same officer who responded to our house on May 11th of 2020. And so he actually drove Danny to the hospital because, initially nobody really knew what had happened. Like, he had gone to the doctor, the Friday prior to that, and she thought he had a blockage, so she took him to his pediatrician. And he said, oh, he's fine, just let him get over this. And I think later kind of what had come out was that he possibly had shaken baby syndrome and these other things. And I think that was all stuff that had kind of come out after the fact. But this police officer, he drove her to the hospital. And then when he came back, he said, that's one of them that he said, it sticks with me. He said, I struggle to sleep sometimes just thinking about it. And to me, that's something that we don't really think about, because we don't think about that officer who had to see Dawson be resuscitated 3 times and see Danny and I's emotions in the hospital. That's somebody who is directly tied to the story, but I mean, he played a very big part. But for him, it was one instance that he was there, but it's something for him that now he struggles with. And so, I think of him as a victim. I think of the detectives that were here as victims, the nurses and doctors who worked on Dawson as victims, the prosecutors for the state, the judge, all these people that aren't even part of my family, but they're all people that have to see these things and live with it and figure out a way to try to deal with it. There's so many victims throughout the whole thing that they're heroes in my eyes.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So many times throughout my different episodes, I've mentioned the first responders and having to hear them testify and see them tear up on the stand and just all of the things that they have to go through. It's really sad because a lot of people don't think about them. Jury members, for example, I just interviewed a jury member for the last episode I did, and it was eye-opening, just the things that they have to see and hear and process. How do they deal with that? So it really is the net that's cast very widely.
Very, very, very much so. During the lead up to, when we thought we were going to go to trial, that was kind of one of the things they kept telling me was, you need to be ready for things to come out that you weren't expecting. You need to be ready for things to be said that you're not going to agree with. And I understood that. And I think that there was a lot of people that kind of motivated me throughout the whole thing. Where I think about the lead detective on the case, he was very understanding and supportive of me, and that was something that I didn't necessarily expect, was that there was definitely times with the detectives where I felt very on edge, especially during the first phase of questioning that we had to deal with at the first hospital we were at. I was very nervous, like, oh, am I going to get arrested? They're going to think that it was me, because to me, just the timeline of it seemed very off. Because initially I had thought it was about 18 minutes after I backed out of the driveway. Because that was when I got the first phone call, was 18 minutes after I had left. And so to me, it was very nerve-wracking of, I just want to be in the hospital with my son, but I'm going to be arrested for something and not know what it was. And I realized we had left that first hospital and they were going to transport Dawson to a bigger hospital that had more staff and more, all these things. And it was on the way back. That's where I had that, okay, Danny had something to do with whatever's going on, because she seemed to try to push this story on me. Like, oh, I didn't tell you this, but last night, the dog had knocked him off the couch. And as soon as she said that, I said, okay, there's foul play here. Timelines of everything. Like, they're going to assume that it was me. And so a lot of these detectives, through their questioning and everything, when I realized, okay, like, they got her to admit to, the wrongdoing, at that point, like, it became about supporting me. And so I saw these other people that said, you know what, like, they were there for Dawson, and I never wanted Dawson to feel like he was alone through anything. So through the entire stay at the hospital, I left one time to get clothes. One other time I had been in the hospital for, I think, 3 days. At that point, hadn't showered, hadn't really eaten, which, none of those things were a concern for me. But that was one of the things that had kind of been brought up, was they were going to take him in for more x-rays and CT scans and all these different things. And they said, you should go get out of this room for a minute. So I went home, I showered, and then I went right back to the hospital, because I never wanted him to feel alone. And I had all these other people, the detectives and the prosecutors and all these people supporting me, but ultimately they were there for Dawson. So through all of these people, it inspired me to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to keep going because they're still going. Because I had a lot of times where I didn't feel the desire to continue on, and it was so many raw emotions in the beginning. And so that was one of the things that I had to say is, if they're still going and they're still here for Dawson, I'm going to still be here for Dawson until he gets the justice that he deserves.
It's got to be the hardest thing you ever did. And I mean, you served in the military, so it's not like you don't know what a struggle is, but I can only imagine.
Yeah. Well, and everything with Dawson, I mean, it overshadows anything and everything I ever did, saw, dealt with in the military. I mean, everything. Like, there was nothing that brought me to my knees the way everything, like Dawson in general did. I'm not a super emotional guy. And that was one of the things that always kind of sticks with me in my mind, is that right after Dawson was born, it was like an all-day ordeal. The day before, she said, oh, I'm having contractions. It really hurts. So we took her to the hospital, and they said, oh, well, you're only a centimeter dilated, so we'll have you come back when, it's worse. So then later that night, it was, well, it's way worse. So we took her back to the hospital, and they said, well, you're still only a centimeter, so, you got to figure it out. Come back when it's even worse. So later that morning, we had the same thing. It was 5:30 in the morning, I think. And she said, we need to go to the hospital. It's so bad. I can't stand it. And so we got to the hospital and they said she wasn't dilated enough. She said, well, you'll have to come back. And I said, we've already been sent back 3 times, And one of the nurses, she had Danny kind of sit up in the bed and she said, I did not realize how short and small you are. You need to lay like this. This will kind of force the dilation and all these things. And so from about 7:00 in the morning until Dawson was born at 11:28 p.m., an all day ordeal. So all my family, they were like, well, this is taking so long. Everybody was like, well, we're going to go home and sleep, call us if this starts happening. And so they had all left. And then maybe 10 minutes after they left, I said, oh, we're pushing now. So I had to text them all and they come back. And actually it is funny. His birthday was March 9th. And that's my grandpa's birthday. So Dawson and my grandpa were exactly 70 years apart. And, earlier in March, probably around the 1st or whatever, Danny had a dream. And she said, well, I had a dream. He's going to be born on March 9th. And, I said, no, it's going to be before that. It'll be before that. I think I said, March 6th or something. And so the 6th came and went, nothing. And on March 9th, I kept looking at the clock because I was like, man, it'd be so cool for him to share a birthday with my grandpa. But also, if I wasn't right, she can't be right. It was just kind of this little funny. But yeah, he waited till the last minute, 11:28 p.m. And after he was born, I was like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. This is my son. And so I had walked out of the delivery room and I started walking down the hall to tell everybody, and this is right at the start of COVID. Like, we didn't have any confirmed positive cases in Idaho at that point in time. So we didn't, the whole family could come back and see him. And I remember, as soon as I walked out that door and I started walking down the hall, I just started crying. It was like in that moment, I was like, my entire life now revolves around a little boy that's in there that's not even 20 minutes old yet, but everything I do in life from this point forward is all about him. And so, I had to kind of like wipe my eyes and say, okay, man up for a second, go tell everybody he's here, and then you can cry. I just remember, that was kind of the incredible thing about him, was that he was very calm and just everything about him was perfect, and it overwhelmed me, so I think things from the military, there was a lot of it that was, overwhelming or stressful or whatever, but it was all stuff that, like misery loves company kind of. So there's a lot of things in the military that were miserable, but I have a lot of brothers that, went through those experiences with me. And so through that, I had a very shared hardship. And so we were able to get through it together. Whereas with Dawson, that's something that's very hard to overcome, because the only other person that as a parent can experience my loss with Dawson is the person who caused the loss of Dawson.
Yeah.
So it's very different.
I have heard it's very isolating.
Oh, yeah. And it's a very selfish feeling. One of the things that had happened was I had a lady who made a book. So she asked me, she said, hey, I'm making a book for you. She said, can you, give me pictures you have of Dawson and everything? And so she had called me on the phone one day and she told me that she had lost her son and he was 40 years old. And she said, it was just randomly one day, she said he was out in the front yard and then died right there in the yard. And when she told me that, it's funny because I had the thought in my head of, this isn't the same thing. And then she's the one who said it out loud. She said the quiet part out loud, that somebody who's experienced the loss of a child, they typically don't say that out loud. And it's the fact that it's a very selfish feeling, because your son was 40 years old and, you have all these memories of him. You saw his first steps. You saw him accomplish things in life. You saw him become a parent himself, get married, all these things. I was robbed of all of that. I'll never know what Dawson's voice sounds like. I'll never hear his laugh. I'll never hear him say, I love you. I'll never see his first steps or see him graduate or, hear what he wants to be when he grows up. All of these things are robbed from me. It is a very isolating feeling, because there's so many things that come about it where, somebody that had 3 months, it's like, well, you had an extra month. I was robbed of that extra month, and so that's what makes it very hard, is that unless somebody has experienced the exact same loss that you did, it's one of the most isolating experiences and feelings I've ever had in my life. I felt very alone through everything because I didn't want to talk with Danny about it, because one day I felt sorry for her. The next day I felt anger towards her. The next day I felt, she deserved everything that happened to her, and it was very...
I bet it was a roller coaster for a lot of reasons, but I am glad you're surrounded with family, and they must miss Dawson an awful lot too. It looked like your dad was very close with him.
Oh yeah, my dad, so one thing I can say is, for me growing up, I was very spoiled with my parents. I never had to wonder, do they love me? And it's so unfortunate that so many children and people had to experience that throughout life, absent parents, or I never had to deal with that. My mom and dad did everything in their power to make sure that my brother and I were happy and healthy and taken care of. And they made so many sacrifices for us. And so I think, with my dad, like having Dawson, that was just an extension of him. Every single opportunity imaginable, my dad wanted Dawson there. One of the first things my dad bought was matching sunglasses for Dawson. And so there's a picture of my dad and Dawson both wearing sunglasses. And it's so funny to me because, Dawson, if he was outside, he was in a stroller or whatever, his eyes were already covered, but they had those matching sunglasses. And so that's like, my dad's screensaver is that picture of him holding Dawson and the matching sunglasses. My mom and my dad and myself, all three of us, our screensavers were pictures of Dawson, because I think, especially for us, like, we know how Dawson was and how he loved. It reminds us to try to be more like him in life. Everybody loved Dawson, and my dad is an incredible man and an incredible father, and been better grandfather. Everything with Dawson. I mean, my dad just right away, fell in love with.
Good. I'm glad he has all those memories too. And I saw something about a Build-A-Bear on Facebook, I think it was.
Oh yeah. So actually what happened was, I think it was Father's Day that I did that for my dad. Maybe 3 weeks prior to that, I had seen a video of a man who had lost his son. So when his son had passed away, he was an organ donor. And so his heart went to someone else who needed a heart. Watching that video, this guy opens a box, and it's got a Build-A-Bear in it. And it's got the heartbeat of this man's son who had passed away playing. And the person who had received his son's heart, they went in for their year checkup, took the recording of the heart, and then sent it to this father.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was so moving, because it's the kinds of things that people can do for one another. We focus so much on the negative of the world. When you look at the positive things in life, you get a more positive outlook on life. But I watched this video and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm almost positive I recorded Dawson's heartbeat. So I ended up saying, okay, you know what? Like, I have this heartbeat. Father's Day is coming up. I know how much my dad loved Dawson. And so my girlfriend and I went to the mall, and I actually played that recording into a heartbeat for that bear. Everybody who heard it and figured out like what it was, it meant so much more to them. And so, everybody cried. I showed it to my mom and my dad's fiance. I showed it to both of them, and they immediately cried. And, it was just beautiful the way that it was able to be done. My brother had a friend who, I didn't know that she had done it, but she asked my parents if she could have like 2 of Dawson's swaddle blankets, and she actually made a bear out of them. And then there was some of Dawson's hair on one of the swaddle blankets. And so they actually took that and put that around in this bear. So now, every night I'm like a 3-year-old. I cuddle with Dawson's bear.
Oh.
Every night, never fails.
And now, one last pause for a sponsor break. What are your favorite memories about him?
Oh, I have millions. There was one point in time where we had taken him out to this park. It's kind of like, they have all these statues. It's this trail that you walk on, and we took him out there in his stroller. It was the first time he was ever in a stroller. And I just thought it was funny because it was Danny's parents, Danny and I, and we had gone out there, and all four of us wanted to push him around because it meant we got the attention, and, everybody wanted to see him. And so we kept, well, it's my turn. And the whole time he slept, but it didn't matter to us, the fact that he was just sleeping and looked, absolutely perfect. And so that's a huge memory for me, is one of the times we took him out and, showed him off to the world. I think I would say, though, my absolute favorite memory in the world of him, it was Mother's Day. So May 10th of 2020, the day before the incident. So that morning, he would wake up a lot. It was terrifying because he would just lay there, and look at the baby monitor. And so one of the things that he would do is he would just look at that baby monitor. He wouldn't cry. He wouldn't make any noise. And then when you woke up, it was like, oh my goodness, what happened? What did I miss? Like, why hasn't he made a sound? And it was, and then you look and he's just staring at the screen.
Oh my gosh.
And so that morning, I got up and I came in and I got him a bottle, and in his room, we had a rocking chair. I'm actually sitting in it right now. I'm in his room. I thought that'd be a good place to do this, to give me all the memories of him.
Aww.
So I had him in my arm and I was feeding him. And he kept pulling his head away from the bottle to just look at me and smile. And it was like, that's all he wanted to do that day was smile. So one of my favorite pictures ever of him is, it's the one that just about everybody's seen. I think it's the picture that you have on the blog of him where he's just looking up and smiling. And that was that same day. So he probably smiled at me 20 different times. Because he would drink a little bit, and then he'd poke his head around and look at me and smile.
Aww.
And then a little while later, we had all the moms come, my mom and her mom, they came over, and that whole time, so that picture, it was actually Danny had taken him in to change him, and he kept smiling at her. And so her dad got his camera and took that picture. So to me, that's just one of the very real memories I have of him, is just how many times he kept smiling at me. It was that day he decided I'm going to smile as much as I possibly can at you. And he'd smile, and then he'd be like, wait, I'm still thirsty. So he'd go back to it, and then he'd poke his head back and say, but look, I'm smiling. And then, so that to me was just perfect. One of the sounds he would make, it freaked me out. The first time he ever did it was 12 hours after he was born. I was in the hospital and I was holding him. One of the nurses came in to check on him, and she gave me a bottle to feed to him. And he had a very strong body. Even for a newborn, right? He was very could kind of stand himself up straight, and a strong neck, he would support his own neck. Instantly he was doing these things. So that first day in the hospital, not even 24 hours old yet, and I had him in my arms, and he kind of started wiggling back and forth like a worm, and I was like, oh my goodness, what's going on? What are you doing? And he made this sound, and then he did it when he was hungry, and so he would go, heh, 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 heh. And so that was like, okay, we'll give him a bottle, feed him. It was just something that was so funny, because if I'm hungry, I say, oh, I'm going to go cook something, or, oh, hey, can you make me this, or whatever, but for him, it was that was his trademark sound that let us know he was hungry. He didn't cry when he wanted a bottle. He didn't, nothing. Even changing him, we didn't know that we had to change him unless we looked. He would just hang out. And the dog that I have, a basset hound, and her name's June, and June adored Dawson. She was obsessed with him. So she used to, if he made sounds in his swing or whatever, because we had a swing and he would sit in it next to the couch. And so she would take her toys and go set it on him, and then just look at him like, do you want to play? There's so many things. I could talk all day about beautiful memories of Dawson and things that I absolutely loved about him. He was so easygoing, and, if we put a hat on him or whatever, he didn't care. It was just like, okay, get your pictures. And I was so blessed to have him as a son because of just how easy he was. From the second he was born, even to now, I have memories of him. I have signs of things he's kind of left behind for me. And I have a niece who she's 6 now, but she was 4 when Dawson passed away. And even still now, she, that's where his nickname Dolphin came from, because she couldn't pronounce his actual name. She couldn't say Dawson. So she called him Baby Dolphin. That was what his nickname became, was Baby Dolphin. Now, like I see dolphins and I'm like, that's Dawson. That's my image of him. And one of the things that she does as well is she's very close with him in so many ways. And so she always tells her mom, like, I see Dawson up in the clouds. She said he's got a train that he plays with. And she said, he's getting so big, he's bigger than me now. And so one of the things that my niece says is, she says, he's got a bunk bed and there's somebody that shares that bunk bed with him. And I think about that, something that wasn't super common knowledge, but when I was in the military, Danny had gotten pregnant and she didn't want it. I said, look, we'll figure it out, don't make any decisions. And against my wishes, she had gone and gotten an abortion. So for my niece to say he's got a bunk bed and he has somebody sharing that bunk bed with him. And then she said he plays with trains. And something she didn't know is that we were in Baker City, Oregon, and there was a restaurant there. And it's a restaurant that has trains. It's got toy trains that go around the building. And we were actually at that restaurant when Danny got the phone call that said she was pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
To me, I think well, that's something my niece had no clue about. There's no way that she would have known. We were standing at a restaurant with trains in it when we found out that Danny was pregnant with Dawson. And then she says he's got a bunk bed and he's playing with trains. One of the things too, she said, is that, she'll always tell us, well, Dawson said he's going to put on a show for us tonight. And then the sunset is always incredible.
That's so cool.
If the sunset's like, oh, that's cool, there's a sunset, she didn't tell us that he said he was going to put on a show for us. But whenever she does tell us that, the sunset is immaculate. It's beautiful. The day after he had passed away, I was at home just in a daze, kind of sitting there, what do I do with my life now? And my mom was with me and she said, we need to get you out of the house. Let's go check the mail. And I said, I don't want to go check the mail. And she said, well, we need to get you out of the house. You need to get up and move. And it was more to get her to stop talking to me than it was to get out of the house. But so we walked up to the mailbox and then walked back to the house. And when we got to my front yard, there was a little feather sitting in it. And my mom said, there's a feather right there. And I said, okay, it's a feather. And she said, well, do you know what that means? And I said, no. And she said, well, a feather is supposed to be a gift from someone in heaven that wants you to know that they love you and they're thinking about you. And so now I always find these little baby feathers, tiny feathers, all the time. Like anytime I start feeling down or start kind of feeling overwhelmed with things, like I find a little baby feather. So to me, there's so many things with Dawson that I think are just absolutely incredible and give me an overwhelming sense of joy thinking about him.
That's great. I'm so glad you get signs from him and he's still with you.
Yes. Yeah. Not a day goes by where I don't think about him, but not a day goes by where I don't get something that I feel like is directly from him. And that's beautiful.
Oh, it's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And it's so important to remember who they were, not just what happened to them. So it's amazing that you have so many memories and that your family got to spend so much time with him. I'm glad to hear that he was surrounded by love.
Oh, yeah. And he gave nothing but love his entire life. And that's amazing as well, is that even at such a young age, he was able to change the world as much as he did and have a positive effect on so many people and give so much love.
That's for sure. I heard a little rumor that you might be having another little addition at some point.
Yes. Yep. So on Tuesday is 16 weeks. So tomorrow we're actually having a gender reveal and finding out what the gender will be of this new baby.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. This will be my first child since Dawson. So it's bringing up a lot of, memories and emotions. I'm beyond excited. I will say I'm team boy.
Yeah.
But yeah, and actually the way we kind of told everybody, we told my mom and my dad, and we gave them a card that said, I'm trying to think of how we worded. Basically, we said, Dawson is telling his baby sibling everything about us. And, he's handpicking a perfect baby for us. And that's kind of something I've said since Dawson first passed away, was that if I ever had another child, Dawson would be such a massive part of their life. If it's a boy, its middle name will be Dawson. And then if it's a girl, my girlfriend's family, they have a tradition. And so I said, okay, well, she'll have 2 middle names then. But yeah, no matter what, Dawson will be a massive, massive part of my family and my child's life. Like everything, Dawson is going to be huge because I always want his name remembered. And I just look forward so much to doing this again and being blessed with another baby. So a big part of me is like, I know Dawson's got little things up his sleeve that he's going to blow my mind with. Yeah, I'm very excited about the idea of another baby.
That's so exciting. I'm so happy for you. You deserve this gift. You've went through enough, and I think you're right. Dawson's definitely going to pick the perfect baby for you.
Yes, and I'll find out his sense of humor,
Oh boy.
That's something that everybody always says is, they say, well, the second one's the hard one. And I think, well, I was the second one, so I think there could be truth to that, but I'm beyond excited about it.
Good. I'm so happy for you, and I hope everything works out great. And I'm sure you'll have plenty of reminders of Dawson in the new baby as well.
Oh yeah, I'm hoping for the head of hair.
Yes.
I'm excited. I'm beyond excited to think about this new journey and everything. I'm obviously very nervous as well. Being a father is such an honor and such a big responsibility that so many people take for granted. And the fact that I get another shot at it, as far as with Dawson, I'll always be a father. But to think about, the fact that I'm going to get an opportunity again to love another child the same way I love Dawson, it's a lot to take in, and it's so incredible. So I feel very blessed. Like God has blessed my family so much just to give us Dawson in the first place, and then to give us the opportunity to do this again.
Yeah. Well, you all deserve it. Well, thank you so much. I'm really, really appreciative that you came on and talked about Dawson and shared so much about him so we can help you keep his memory alive, because I can tell you we're not going to let him be forgotten.
I appreciate that so much. There's a lot of people in this story that are heroes, and more good has come out than I've ever expected, as far as how much good there is in the world. And I think about, my next door neighbor, she worked on Dawson and resuscitated him the first time. So she's a hero in my eyes, because without her, I think that would have been the end of it. But because she resuscitated him, and then, I had firefighters that showed up and they resuscitated him a second time. And then the paramedics and the ambulance on the way to the hospital resuscitated him. And so with all of that, it gave me the opportunity to spend that last week with Dawson and say goodbye and tell him how much he meant to me and how much I loved him. And, and so one of the things I had said to the court was, between my next door neighbor, to the firefighters, to the paramedics, to the police officers, the detectives, the prosecutors, the judge, all these people, I've never felt like Dawson did not have the representation that he deserved. And I never had to feel like I was in this fight by myself, because I have so many people that didn't know him physically, but they know him emotionally and are such a huge part of his story and his life. So many people that have helped carry his name on, even though he is gone, but he's, not forgotten. And so to me, that means so much. And to my family, it means so much as well. Like I'm so grateful to so many people. I mean, the prosecutors, they worked so hard on the case, and they had to read through such traumatic things, even for them to read and hear. And they had a victims witness coordinator for the state of Idaho. She was incredible. I mean, she would call me randomly and say, "Hey, how are you doing? What's going on? What's new in your life? Are you doing okay? What can we do to help you?" And so many people that didn't have to care, they do care. And to me, that means everything. And so thank you very much for, one, the opportunity to speak with you, and two, for sharing Dawson's story And I will say I appreciate the fact that in the beginning, one of the emotions I kind of went through was wanting to protect Danny.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't want to jump to the worst case because I didn't know, what was going on. And so for you, with the initial way that you reported it, it was fact-based and not opinion-based. And I do appreciate that, because that's something that in the beginning, it was a lot of people jumping to conclusions and saying, well, she didn't have a support system, and, it was probably a deadbeat dad and a single mom. And so that was something that, like, well, these people don't know me, but yet they're judging me based on one piece of information instead of looking at everything. And so the way that you had reported it and everything, I just, thank you from me, from my family, from everybody. It means a lot. It does.
You're very welcome. One thing that doing this has taught me is that the family, and being respectful to the family and empathetic towards them, is the most important thing, because, as you said, there's so many victims in these stories. And I don't think a lot of people, when they're hearing, quote unquote true crime, think about the families as real people. They just sort of look at it as entertainment, and it can't be treated that way.
Exactly.
You're a real family. You're going through this awful time in your life, and you deserve to be treated with respect.
Very much so. And, and that to me means a lot, because from day one, I was very fragile about everything. And that's something I had to learn through all of this as well, is that, there's a lot of people that will take being a parent for granted and get angry with their children or whatever. And it's something I had to watch. And it just kind of makes you think, like, at the same time, you don't know what someone else is going through sitting there. It's like I used to drive down the freeway and think, people speeding past me, what a jerk. And then May 11th, I was the guy speeding on the freeway doing 90 miles an hour. Like, okay, well, today I'm the jerk, but this is why, and so it just opens your mind to all these things and what people are going through, and the families are very fragile. And so the respect coming from it is the most important thing. I mean, that's why I never made any media announcements, because 12 hours later, actually, I don't even think it was 12 hours after Dawson had passed away, I had gotten a message on Facebook from our local news station here that said, hey, would you make a statement on what happened?
Oh my gosh, that's too soon.
And I thought to myself, like, who are these people? Like, how's that your mind? Is just to get the story. You want the exclusive interview and the statement from the dad, and I haven't even gotten the opportunity to process what just happened. And to me, I told them I don't give consent to be quoted on anything, but how dare you?
Yeah.
If the goal is to be the area with the breaking story, you're going about it wrong. If your goal to report it factually, that's what matters, because their first thing was, well, what do you hope happens to her? What are your feelings on this? And to me, I'm like, I have zero desire to talk to you now. So the way that you did it, and understanding that there is a family involved and there are emotions and feelings, and that meant a lot, and that went a long way with me. And that's why I reached out to you and said, thank you. Because looking at, the local news stations and everything, they don't care about me as a person. They don't care about my family. They care about their ratings and how many views they're going to get on a Friday night.
Right, exactly. I've never made it about that. The blog especially was just, a labor of love, I suppose. And that's how I started the podcast too, just saying to myself, whether I have 10 people listening or a million, whatever it is, it's important to me that the stories get told, that the children get remembered, and that the families are honored.
Yes, and I appreciate that more than you could ever know. It means a ton to so many people.
Huge thank you to Adam for taking the time to share with me his memories of Dawson. I wish Adam and his girlfriend nothing but the best in the future with their new baby, and my heart goes out to Adam and all of Dawson's family. Rest well, Dawson. We'll always remember you. My sources for this episode were the Idaho Press, GoFundMe, the Idaho Statesman, KTVB7, Facebook, the Bella Vita Funeral Home website, the Idaho iCourt portal, the Ada County Jail website, and the Idaho Department of Corrections website. That's it for this week. Join me next week for another episode. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com, where you can listen to episodes or become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. Follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest at Suffer the Little Children Pod, and on Twitter and TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook and Instagram. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. All music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. Email tips, comments, questions, or case suggestions to sufferthelittlechildren.pod@gmail.com. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. If you see something, say something. Until next week, bye everyone.